Hi everyone. The immigration industrial complex and industry is off the charts in Ireland. Over the weekend, it was reported that €1.86 billion was spent of our public money on providing accommodation for economic migrants and refugees under the international protection system, and plus the temporary directive that was brought forward by the European Union in the context of the war in Ukraine, where over 112,000 Ukrainians are in Ireland. Now, this doesn't include the amount of money that's been paid in any sort of welfare payments, medical cards, issues around the pressures that would put on basic public services all around the country. Now, really, fundamentally, so much money has been made out of this industry, it's really hard to keep up with the pace that this is moving at. And if you compare this into the National Children's Hospital, which is currently about 2.4, €2.5 billion and rising, that has created a national scandal. Why isn't this industry a national scandal? It's an absolute outrage. And more companies and Irish individuals are making massive, massive profits from this as well. All at our expense, and a big transfer of public wealth to provide cheap labour for the big employers. Now, an important facet of this has been the work permit system. Now, this is important in terms of the immigration chaos in Irish society. Last year, a record amount of work permits were issued in Ireland. Nearly less than 40,000, actually 38,189 work permits were issued. This is up 24%. 24% up since 2023. And remember, the population of Ireland increased last year by 142,000 with net migration figures. And if you consider the record amount of people leaving the country, young people in particular, because they can't see a future here because of the housing disaster and because of the cost of living crisis, it's absolutely just off the charts to what's happening. And this has been exacerbated and pushed forward in the programme for government by the Micheál Martin and the Lowry-led independents along with Simon Harris. And the new minister responsible is Peter Burke. Of course, Peter Burke was the man who got the great eulogy from Michael O'Leary of Ryanair when he was going for election a number of months ago. Now, Peter Burke has been pushing this also as well in his own department and has opened the door again to more people being come in for cheap labour. And an interesting facet of this that I want to just talk about today is around the amount of different nationalities that these work permits have been given to. Now, the biggest amount of work permits have been given to Indians last year, where it was 13,566 work permits were issued to people from India. Brazil were next at 4,553, and Philippines were next at about 4,049 work permits that were issued. Now, what's really important with this in terms of what forms of employment have been pushed, or people are looking for those, big employers are looking for them in different forms of employment. Now, what's fascinating with this has been the push towards the information and communication sector. Now, this would be, of course, the big business interests in Ireland and the global interests that are here domestically in Ireland. So roughly about 18% of the work permits were issued were for this sector. And really what's revealing when you look behind the figures on this is that nearly 1,000 of those were given to, wait for it, Amazon. One of the richest men in the world, not the richest, Jeff Bezos, who increased his wealth during the COVID pandemic for over €70 billion, where a massive transfer of wealth went towards the billionaires and made the poor poorer during the lockdown period, which we all remember. But of course, the political classes and much of the media want us all to forget about that provided a cover for the biggest transfer of public wealth, much the same as the European Union are doing now with the arms industry and the military industrial complex. This is another way that's been used to mobilise labour for these big employers who absolutely offer next to nothing for people in society. They attack workers' rights, notorious for smashing any sort of unions and any organisation amongst workers, wherever they are. And at the same time, they benefit from the policy of the state and their neoliberal agenda that happens right across the European Union. In particular, we have the leaders here in Ireland that are more interested in siding up to these billionaire bosses and big employers than representing the interests of domestic indigenous workers here as well. And this is what it's all about, another form of cheap labour and exploitative labour by the big global capital interests that the Irish government represents rather than the interests of ordinary people. Now, it was interesting because Martin Shanahan, the head of the IDA, said a number of years ago that it's fantastic when Amazon start investing more in Ireland. They said they were looking at attracting more quality global investment. This has always been the agenda of the ITA at the behest of the neoliberals at the top of the European Union and in Ireland too. And also Micheál Martin said at the time when there was an expansion plan around Dublin, and he said there was a further vote of confidence in the skills and talents of Irish people and will provide a welcome boost to our economy, Micheál Martin said. This is interesting because, in fact, 1,000 visas, that work permits that were issued last year, would tell a different story, perhaps, Micheál Martin, in terms of the labour and how it's been used through the work permit system. So this is something really to watch out on, and it's not being spoken about at all by anybody in the media. It's not being spoken about in main discourse as well, but it's important because I'm going to be delving a lot further into this over the next period of time as well, into these companies that are profiting from it, many who perform exploitative work practices on workers as well. And this has issues in terms of, for instance, non-EU citizens on coming into Ireland, for instance, through the work permit system, and puts pressure on accommodation costs, for instance, in terms of keeps artificially inflating house prices and rents as well, and puts pressure on services that are already at breaking point. Today we've heard a report of the nurses and midwives going out and strike now in a number of weeks time again, which will bring basically a lot of the service to a complete and utter standstill because of the abject failing of this and successive governments by pushing this neoliberal agenda and outsourcing and privatising essentially our public health service. And this is part of what's happening in Ireland. And of course, many are benefiting from it. And when you see people like Bezos, people have a notoriously poor record of supporting workers, and that's putting it very mildly. Not to mention how he increased his own personal wealth by over $70 billion during the period of the pandemic. Not to mention where the trillionaires increased their wealth by $1 trillion during that period of time. And of course, it still rolls on in our society, all at the behest of the political, inverted commas, leaders and the current government who are pursuing the same agenda. And this is something really to note in terms of the work permit system. So I'll be talking about this in future videos and other issues around this to highlight really what's going on in society. So I urge you to please share my videos far and wide and to please press subscribe to my channel. So thanks a lot for all the support and really appreciate it. So take care. Slán.